My Teisho today is on case 1 of the Shoyuroku, or the Book of Equinimiy. First, I will read Master Bansho's introduction to the case. Close the gate and snooze. That's how to treat a superior person. Reflection, abbreviation, and elaboration are used for middling and inferior people. How can you stand for someone to ascend the high seat and scowl? If anyone around here doesn't agree, step forward. I have no doubts about him. And the main case. One day, the world-honored one ascended the platform and took his seat. Manjushri struck the sounding post with his gavel and said, "When you realize the Dharma King's Dharma, the Dharma King's Dharma is just as is." At that, the world-honored one descended from the platform. And finally, I'll read Master Wanchi's appreciatory verse on the case. Do you see the true manner of the primal stage? Mother Nature goes on weaving warp and woof. The woven old brocade contains the images of spring. Nothing can be done about Manjushri's outflowing. Well, April has finally arrived here in West Michigan, and just as Master Wanchi wrote in his poem, Mother Nature is once again reweaving the old brocade of spring. The forsythia and the plum trees and the serviceberry shrubs are all in bloom, and the daffodils are going bananas in my backyard. And of course, today is Earth Day. So it seems like a very fitting time to honor the earth, to honor it with a koan. What might be a little less apparent is how the current case about the Dharma King's Dharma might be connected to honoring the earth, but I will try to make that clear. But first, let me say that anytime, not just today, anytime is a good day to honor the earth. We might even say that each time we honor it, each time we feel gratitude for it or appreciate it, we are ourselves weaving the old brocade of spring. It's that interdependent warp and woof of life on our planet. Unfortunately, these days, we have questions. We have questions about the kinds of springs we have been having, very sudden and perhaps too warm, and the kinds of springs we'll have in the foreseeable future. Some of us even wonder if spring will exist in the future given the current state of our climate change crisis and our expectations about the runaway effects of global warming, something I'm very concerned about. And right along with that, there is the loss of pollinator bees and birds in North America. So in many ways, it seems that the old brocade of spring may be getting a little bit threadbare. We might even find ourselves feeling pains of anguish as we watch the degradation of our environment take place before our eyes. I'm now old enough to be able to bear witness to the consequences of climate change because I remember what things used to be like. For example, when I moved here to West Michigan 25 years ago, Lake Michigan would typically freeze and ice dams would build up along the shore, sometimes well over my head, maybe 10 or 12 feet high sometimes. And they would extend out into the bay, perhaps a half a mile, I don't know, maybe more. But that has not happened for many years. And one of the consequences of this lack of ice in the winter is that winter winds are tearing away all the sand below the bluffs along the shore, eroding soil where there are these towering white pines that they stand at the top like sentinels over Lake Michigan. And in some cases, the erosion is so swift and so severe that homes have slid down the dune and right into the lake. And climate chaos has also affected the many fruit orchards that we have in our area. We grow more tart cherries here in West Michigan than I think anywhere in the country. We also grow a lot of apples. But it's been increasingly difficult for farmers because the trees bloom earlier than they used to. And as a result, they are increasingly susceptible to late frosts. And that's to say nothing of the mismatch in time between when these fruit trees are blooming and when pollinator bees and birds are active. And here in town, people have been calling the Conservation District office in unprecedented numbers asking for advice about their spruce trees. I'm one of them. They're dying from fungal infections, which is just also another consequence of climate chaos. Right now I have a Colorado blue spruce in my front yard that's almost 100 feet tall, and it's sick and it's dying, and there's virtually nothing I can do about it. I think sometimes it's easy to ignore something like climate change or something like greenhouse gases because we can't see those gases. But there is, in fact, plenty of visible evidence of our ecological carelessness everywhere we look. A few days ago, we started preparing the soil in a garden bed. Great Wave has a garden bed. We grow vegetables for the local food bank. And one of the things that we did was to add cow manure to the soil. Well, I don't know where the manure came from or who donated it, but it was absolutely full of plastic debris. It was astonishing to see how much plastic there was in it. Like every spadeful had multiple pieces of plastic, which, we had to pick all out by hand and dispose of it. But of course, you can't really dispose of plastic, can you? You can only move it from one place to another. A few years ago, Great Wave did a beach sweep along the shore of Lake Michigan. And we found the usual kinds of things, thousands of cigarette butts, dirty diapers, pieces of broken glass, aluminum cans, ribbons from helium balloons that had been released on the other side of the lake. But the most discouraging thing was the plastic. If we looked closely, we could see tiny, tiny bits of plastic in every square foot of the shore, and there was no way to pick it up. There was too much of it, and it was too small, and it was everywhere. Now that plastic is, I want to make this point, very directly connected to climate change, because there is no phase of the so-called life cycle of plastic that does not contribute to climate change. Plastic is not inert. It outgasses greenhouse gases all the time. So really it's an enormous kind of problem. So when we think about all of these things, we might, like, for example, wish that we would never have to touch another piece of plastic again. But of course, it's not very realistic, is it? On what day in any of our lives have we not touched multiple pieces of plastic? We just can't go cold turkey with that. That stuff is ubiquitous. It's even in our drinking water. There are microplastics in urban drinking water. And of course, to return to directly to the theme of climate change, we probably also wish at the same time we didn't have to contribute to the gushing fountains of carbon monoxide and other greenhouse gases that are polluting our atmosphere. I read just the other day that in 2023, human beings emitted a record amount of carbon dioxide, 37 gigatons. That's 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide. But on what day in any of our lives have we not had to contribute to this? Even if we go live in the woods, go live off the grid somehow and generate power from solar cells or solar panels, it's just the moment something goes wrong or we get sick or something is broken and it has to be repaired, well, we have to contribute to the problem of climate change. Every living scenario that I can imagine involves cars and fuel and electricity and plastic, and it all adds up to this catastrophic fountain of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. In other words, participating in our own environmental destruction is obligatory. So it seems that part of honoring the earth is to ask ourselves what we can do to preserve what's left, even as we destroy it. Now, here at Great Plains Zen Sangha in Michigan, we're trying to create connections between traditional Zen practice and environmental awareness. In short, we're trying to promote eco-dharma. We happen to live in a very beautiful, very precious part of the world, surrounded as we are by national forests, a large wilderness area, and the vast freshwater ocean of Lake Michigan. So living here means it's remarkably easy to feel gratitude for the natural world. It's easy to truly honor and appreciate what we have. And we do that sometimes by holding mindfulness walks in our forests. We do that by conducting beach sweeps. We do that by holding an annual Earth Witness Zen camp in the Nordhaus Dunes wilderness. Now, some people will tell you, and I might be one of them, that these individual and small group efforts, as wonderful as they are, may ultimately have little effect on the outcome. And the reason for that is simple. To avert a climate catastrophe, whole nations need to change gears and radically and immediately get away from fossil fuels. It's the only way. If they do not do it, and I can't imagine that they will, we may be faced with ecological collapse. And if so, you might well wonder why anyone should even lift a finger and bother trying. And I get that point of view, I do. But my take on it is that if there are things that are morally right to do, then we should just do them, even if we can't solve the problem. I mean, if everyone is running off the edge of a cliff like a bunch of lemmings, that doesn't mean we should go with them. We should fight not to go down that way. So we keep trying. It reminds me of something the rabbinical master Tarfon used to say. He said, "It may not be up to you to finish the task, but you are not free to avoid it either." But even if you see the moral obligation to do something, anything, it may remain very hard to see how other parts of our traditional Zen practice can remain relevant as environmental catastrophe looms ever closer. How, we may wonder, can the study of a koan, such as the current case we're looking at, help us avert ecological destruction? We hear Manjushri's statement, when you realize the Dharma King's Dharma, the Dharma King's Dharma is just as is. But what does that have to do with honoring the earth, saving the planet? And likewise, how is the Buddha's stepping down from the preaching platform related to anything like climate chaos? I mean, these are excellent questions. And this koan, just like most of the others that we revere in our tradition, was composed and ripened and solidified 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, when our Chinese ancestor teachers could not possibly have envisioned the kind of climate and environmental crisis that faces us today. They could not have foreseen the climate emergency that now threatens to make large parts of the world uninhabitable. They could not have foreseen the emergency that may produce a mass extinction event, as has happened in ages past, when 90% of all plant and animal species died out. And yet, I believe that the Dharma may be the single most powerful tool we have to change our current very self-destructive course. I believe it because I know that it is only a profound spiritual transformation that can help us shake off the greed, the aversion, and the foolishness that has produced the problems we are currently facing. So, we have this koan, and we have this question, how do we bring the Dharma King's Dharma, the Buddha's Dharma teaching, to bear on our dire circumstances? The Buddha has ascended the preaching platform, and Manjushri declares, when you realize the Dharma King's Dharma is just as is. And then the Buddha steps down, not saying a word. It's hard to make anything of this. The koan doesn't provide much in the way of explanatory connective tissue. We aren't explicitly told why the Buddha declined to speak. We aren't explicitly told the meaning of the Dharma King's Dharma being just as is. And because we are not explicitly told what these things mean, we may feel somewhat distant from the koan. There's a kind of gap. This happens with all koans. There's a kind of gap or a separation from it that we just can't close with rational thought. It's as though there is a secret meaning that we haven't found. According to Joan Sutherland, it's common at the beginning of your work on a koan to try to figure it out. She says we try to hold it in front of us as though there's some secret rattling around inside. And if you just shake it the right way, it'll fall out, she says. But of course, our shaking doesn't produce anything. And sometimes we just shake harder, but that doesn't work either. I remember many years ago when I was handed a copy of the first 200 miscellaneous koans in our curriculum in the White Plama Sangha. And even though you're really not supposed to do it, I couldn't resist paging through it and looking at all the koans, all the way to the last page where my eye fell upon this koan. It goes, the Dharma eye has no crack. Well, for some reason, I was just gobsmacked by that. I couldn't conceive of anything more insensible and obtuse than the Dharma eye has no crack. I felt very far away, very separated from that koan. And why? Because I just couldn't let it be. it's very simple. Of course the Dharma eye has no crack. It's just as is. But you see, when we try to deduce or calculate the answer to a koan, we just miss it. Shishin Wick Roshi points out in his commentary on our current case that we are always trying to fiddle around with things, always adding something or wishing something could be taken away. We're always trying to push another head, put another head atop our own. But this just doesn't work. And it's those false heads, those false distances, those separations from things and people and even ideas that form the basis of our delusions. They are the fictional realities we use to convince ourselves that we are somehow at a safe distance from the big bad world, that we are somehow beyond the reach of cause and effect. And it's exactly this tendency that we see at work in those who persist in denying the reality of climate change. And it is exactly this tendency that is at work in those who don't deny climate change, but turn around and try to balance the overwhelmingly grievous news about it with a false hope. A false hope that someone, somewhere, is going to figure out how we can avoid tidal waves of suffering that are destined to swallow millions of us as we rush headlong on our self-destructive course. But the great value of sitting with this koan is that it forces us to reckon with those separations, those gaps that we're imputing upon reality. It forces to give up those forms of false hope and wishful thinking that keep us sleepwalking toward ecological collapse, to say nothing of every other kind of suffering. In other words, sitting with this, or any koan, forces us to realize that we do not live beyond the reach of causality. We do not live beyond the reach of impermanence. And that right there is the biggest gap we humans have inserted between us and reality. It's the gap between ourselves and the law of impermanence. It's a gap, a separation between what we desperately want to be true and the reality that things are just as is, which means they change. And this gap is a deep, very old gap. It has been growing since, in my mind, since the beginning of the Neolithic. A gap between us and nature, a gap in which we see the earth and humanity as independent rather than interdependent systems. Kind of reminds me of those moments when, as children, we got angry with our parents and decided to run away from home. At the ripe old age of 5, we thought we knew better how to live our lives than our parents did. So we put a few toys and some graham crackers in a bag and went to say goodbye to our parents. Of course, at that point, we probably allowed them to make some packing suggestions, like maybe a change of underwear, and because it was lunchtime, a peanut butter sandwich, some carrot sticks. But then, being well supplied, we went out the back door, out into the big wide world to live on our own. And all the while, our parents were discreetly smiling and letting all this happen, because this is part of how children learn who they are and what their relationship is with their parents. They knew that the bond between them and their children was right and tight. And just like a watchful parent, Mother Nature has also never had any doubt that we were firmly entrenched in the family life of the planet. From her perspective, there was never any separation. No gap was even possible. Yet, just like children pretending we can live alone with our parents, we humans have been pretending for the past 10,000 years that we can live without any regard for the earth. We imputed an enormous gap between our affairs and the affairs of our environment on which we depend. We impute these gaps on everything and everyone, including nature, and as a result get confused and make mistakes because we don't know who we really are. And then we don't understand things like why the Buddha got down from the preaching platform, choosing not to speak. We don't understand it because we don't see ourselves as Buddha. That's a gap between the Buddha, the world-honored one, the Dharma king, and us. And likewise, we don't understand the meaning of Manjushri's statement, the Dharma king's Dharma is just as is. We don't understand because we don't think the Dharma is within our grasp. It's a big gap. But as we sit with the koan, over time we may find a way to relax a bit with it and stop shaking it violently. We just let the koan be. And we do that, as we do that, and the gaps begin to shrink. And eventually we really see that there were never any gaps to begin with. At that very moment, the child comes home. At that very moment, we see that the koan is all about us, all about our lives, right here, right now. It doesn't matter if the koan is 1,000 years old or 20 minutes old. It is alive right here, now. It would be hard for me to overemphasize this point. Working on koans is not some abstract practice or exercise that's preparing to live your life somewhere down the road. Koans are your life. Koans teach us to swing with what's right in front of us. They help us learn how to live, let's say, thusly, or in Manjushri's words, as is, rather than distantly or indirectly or in our heads, separated from everything, including our true selves. I mean, we keep our eyes open during Zazen because it is this life, this moment, that contains everything we need. This moment leaves nothing out. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It doesn't matter what's going on in your country. It doesn't matter what's going on in your house. It doesn't matter if you're facing ecological collapse or a king-size bed. It doesn't matter if you're facing a bulldozer or a field of daisies or a tank or a box of chocolates. It doesn't matter. Because all there is just this, as is. Why fight it? In his commentary on this case, Shishin Roshi writes, when you truly understand the Dharma, it's just this. It's as is. All kinds of words and phrases have been invented to express as-isness, but none are needed. Don't add anything extra. Just let everything be as it is. That's liberation. And we see in this case that that is exactly what the Buddha did. He just let things be. He didn't add any words. He just listened to what Manjushri said and he stepped down from the platform. Manjushri had said it all and nothing else could be done. So the Buddha let it be. Now, you might say, that's well and good, but I can just let things happen when I'm sitting with a koan. But if I just let everything be with regard to something like climate change, won't I be contributing to the problem? Isn't letting everything be just exactly the kind of apathetic behavior we can no longer afford? But you see, that view of the meaning of the phrase letting things be is a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation. Letting things be is not the same as just sitting on your hands and waiting for shit to happen. And for my money, you can't just let things be with a koan and not have that come into your daily life. Letting everything be is a matter of recognizing who or what you are at any given moment. Letting everything be is not an idea about practice. It's not a conceptual way to respond to our problems. It's not a solution in the conventional sense. Letting everything be means just directly facing your life no matter what it is. It means there can be no gaps. And it does take a lot of courage to do it. It takes a lot of courage to be completely present to what life is bringing you. Even if the worst possible scenario were to develop, you can still be present. And if you are, I think you'll find that everything, even in the midst of brokenheartedness and grief, has a kind of beauty. Even if you're standing in the midst of an ecological collapse, even if you are facing the prospect of extinction, the world will still somehow be beautiful. It will still include you, just like a loving parent. Even if that parent is dying. The world never stops being something we can appreciate and honor with our complete, wholehearted presence. In her long-form essay Facing Extinction, Dharma teacher Catherine Ingram explains that she believes our ecological crisis is so severe that a mass extinction event that includes humanity is not only underway now, but unstoppable. And she further knows that some people, hearing that message, might despair and consider ending their lives. After all, what is the point of going on when everything we hold dear is to be lost? What is the point of going on when we are fast approaching the end of legacy, including Dharma legacy? But she explains that living with the grief of an ecological catastrophe may be akin to how a person with a terminal diagnosis might experience his or her final phase, the awareness of death undeniable, and the magnificence of life ever more obvious. She goes on to say that to stay steady, you may be forced into a witnessing presence, vast enough to contain your grief. And then you may notice a growing tendency to appreciate simple moments of connection and many small joys. And you may feel more awake than you have for a long time. To stay steady, we must see that the Dharma is just as is. To see that is to abide in a witnessing presence. It is to appreciate the first line of Master Wanshi's poem. Do you see the true manner of the primal stage? Don't be fooled by the unusual terminology here. Do you see the true manner of the primal stage? The primal stage is the witnessing presence of the Buddha. Another translator rendered that line in a very different, somewhat more nature-oriented way. writing, "Do you see the unique breeze of reality?" But either way, the poem is just asking if you can see into the most fundamental aspect of your life. What is the primal stage of your life? What is exactly the unique breeze of your life? That is, what is the most basic, most fundamental truth of your existence? Well, it's presence. It's our most natural state. Our most natural state has no gaps or separations of any kind. It's just as is. It's not something you have to invent or concoct. It's just the unique breeze of reality. It's intrinsic. It's not something that comes and goes. It's always here, whether we realize it or not. And the truly wondrous thing about it is that there is never a time when you can't depend upon it. You can depend upon it while making lunch, and you can depend on it while witnessing the end of the world. It's immutable, changeless, enduring, even in the midst of change. I remember many years ago I was at a sesshin at Myoshinji, and I was having evening dokusan with my teacher, Myoyu Roshi. The room was dark, lit by just a candle, and I had asked a question that was somehow related to the Dharma. I don't remember exactly what it was, but Myoyu Roshi gave me a rather detailed answer and then suddenly stopped talking. The room went silent for several seconds. I could barely see her face in the dark. And then she said, "There is nothing you can do about it." And I suddenly had a little insight. It's kind of an important point about the separations we make in life. We can only do something about things when there is a gap. But when there is no gap, then even in the midst of our activity, there is this recognition that there is nothing we can do about it. Please hear what I'm saying. It's another way, another phrase of saying, "Let it be." Master Wanshi concluded his verse similarly on this particular case. He wrote, "There is nothing you can do about Manjushri's outflowing," meaning there is nothing outside of, or different from, or not included in what he said. And it's all because he was completely present. Now, to someone who is unfamiliar with our tradition, the phrase "there is nothing you can do about it" might come across as hopeless or complacent or resigned or even bitter. But nothing could be further from the truth. That there is nothing you can do about it is the relief, the grace, the mercy, the gift of fearlessness and joy in this life just as is. When there is nothing you can do about it, all doubts vanish. When there is nothing you can do about it, everything you do is Buddha activity. When there is nothing you can do about it, there is nothing you cannot do and nothing you cannot know. Just be fully present, and the unique and exquisite spring breeze of reality will be your life. Well, I hope that you can give a like to this video and subscribe. Subscribing really helps as I try to build the channel and perpetuate the Dharma. And I appreciate you listening. Please take good care.